our e-permitting manager. I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay, Terry, thank you. Can everybody just, the sound from the room is pretty faint. I don't know if that was true for other people on the meeting, but it was, I could hear you, but just barely. So just, I don't know if you can turn that sound up a little bit. And then Laura, can you share, we were gonna use Jonathan Balcony from the city of Albany sent in a really pretty good outline of a whole bunch of the ideas and concerns that folks have. And I thought we would just kind of walk through that and have some discussion of the things that he raised, because I think he really, he actually caught a few things that I wasn't really even thinking about discussing today, but seemed like really good, good discussion topics. So let's see, can you, yeah, thanks. If you can scroll down that a little bit. Thank you, Laura. Okay. So and again, for the work group, and we have a few people, Noel from CCB is here. Thank you for coming. This is coming out of the House Bill 2415 rulemaking committee, which has splintered off into a few work groups to discuss different things. The overall committee is discussing kind of the state of electronic processes for permitting systems within Oregon, and looking to 2025 of kind of what would be baseline requirements for all local jurisdictions offer electronic permitting or different features potentially of online activity for a building permitting department or an inspection. So, and as part of that, one of the things raised by the group was licensing and how that interacts in an electronic system. And so that's kind of that is what this discussion is about today. And again, Jonathan did a great job of kind of putting things together. And so on his first discussion item is basically just access to the data for those who are not on e-permitting. So currently e-permitting, we load every single day. We have all of the building codes division, the CCB licenses. We also do architects, engineers, on-site, landscape contractors. But those are not, we kind of load those. And actually Lane Council of Governments has a database for us with those licenses, and we run a job on it that then picks out just the new information and loads that into our Excel e-permitting setup. So one thing, so I think Noah, one of the questions here was, I know that Building Codes Division has been publishing its data to oregon.data.gov, and I think that's in the future for CCB. Is that true?
Yes, that is true. That's the one data set that we are hopefully going to get out before we roll to a new system. Could you hear that?
And do you have a sense of kind of a rough, I know nobody's going to hold you to this, but a rough timeline of when folks might be able to expect to see the CCB data up on,
No,
or
time.
What's that?
No, I do not at this time.
Okay. So for those of you, so City of Portland, I know in the past you were using a web service. How are you currently accessing the data for BCD and CCB?
I'm sorry.
Hi. Can you hear me? This is Lee Wheeler.
Yes.
Okay, great. Come on. Trying to figure out my new technology here. What we're doing is we're uploading BCD and CCB license information to our system overnight, and then using that to validate licenses for mostly trades permits coming in right now. We have some projects to also include the LCB, which we do not at this time, but that's kind of where we're going. But we're not going to an online source. We're using an internal table, which we download once per day.
So is that information being, I think, are you not grabbing the license, the BCD licenses from Oregon.data.gov, or are we directly FTPing it to you?
I had to check with my tech folks, like the actual like database server people, but I believe we are getting a data set either sent to us, pushed, or we are downloading it. That I'm not 100% sure of. Like,
Okay,
I don't think we're going to Oregon.data.gov. I think we're getting a set of licenses in a file, like a CSV file.
Well, I think so. For the building codes licenses, those are being published at Oregon.data.gov, which is where you can download them as a CSV file. And I think that's one of the hopes, is that CCB would do that so that people could go to one spot and grab both sets of things. Noel, do you know, are you FTPing those to the city of Portland currently?
Don't know explicitly about the city of Portland's methodology. By the way, I'm the IT manager / CIO, so technology is very attractive to me. I like to know which mechanism, but probably not to the rest of the people in the room.
Okay.
And I think about that mechanism.
So I heard Portland, that I heard you say, or sorry, Lee, you said that that one of the other sets of licenses that you're interested in getting is the LCD licenses as well as the BCD licenses. And we currently do get those on a, I think on a spreadsheet. I don't think it's I know it's not on a daily basis. I think they email them to us once a month, but that might be something that also we could work with LCB and see if they would be willing to publish those to Oregon.data.gov as well.
You do have a couple of contacts there, and you can go to the LCB license website and download a CSV file from their website. So it seems like if they have that available just online, then it also might be available to publish across to Oregon.data.gov.
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice if everything was kind of dropped in one spot for folks to go gather it, so that you don't have to go to 3 different websites or 4 different websites. But it being available is certainly a big help if you can just grab it off of their website. So, and let's see, which is kind of, so that is on Jonathan's sets of things. That's kind of, we're talking about. Well, we're kind of talking about, I think, number 3 here, which is access to pull the data. So that would be putting it up onto the Oregon.data.gov, and people would grab it and load it into their own loads. Yeah, BCD could supply non-hosted the data set to format or restructure. Yeah, again, I mean, I don't know that our process would work so well for other jurisdictions, but I think we can certainly facilitate trying to work with the different licensing divisions, or we can all work with the different licensing divisions to get the data put into a centralized location and format for folks. Does anybody have any questions or kind of issues, specifically related to gathering the license data, which is what, this first question is about?
Well, one of the things that we've experienced is that the customer can update it, and it's kind of the lag time between when we get our next upload and when the license has been updated with whatever entity that they update with. And I don't know, it's just sort of something to think about as we communicate out to our customers. Because if like someone calls in right this second and fixes, whatever is inactive in their CCP license or whatever license, then we won't get that until midnight tonight or so. And so they have a lag of a business day. And I don't know how we would, address that, but it's just something to think about as we serve customers electronically.
Yeah, or sometimes it's even like a 2-day lag between when something gets fixed there. I mean, we can fix it in our, yes, you get the phone call and you update it, check CCB or BCD's website, update it on our website or in our license thing so they can pull a permit that day, but it does not then get fixed. Or similarly, often permitting agencies get calls from folks because their contact information is incorrect, and we have to send them back to, we send them to CCB, or we send them to whichever agency it is and say, well, you've got to correct it there because we can correct it, but it's going to get overwritten. You know, it's not going to stay. It's not going to be permanently corrected because it will kind of get overwritten by the data from the licensing agency. So, and I don't know how we would address that. Noel, any ideas on your end of thing, or Graham, in terms of how we could speed up the kind of moving of information when something when an individual's license gets updated?
Yeah, as far as the bulk downloads go, that's kind of a feature, not a bug, so to speak. It keeps the load down on the systems. With regard to a particular license which has been updated, certainly for CCB, and I presume for BCD, going to the license inquiry pages always gives you absolutely current information because it does an individual pull out of the database. So in regards to resolving the particular issue of the customer in front of you who says, I've corrected that, one can go to the search pages for CCB, that's what I'm familiar with, and get the absolutely current data. It's not quite absolutely current, come to think of it. About 2 hours old, if I recall correctly, but don't quote me on that interval.
Yeah, I think the least thing was the hope that it would be so nice if we could just instantly have those updates, but I'm not sure. I mean, I think that you're talking about a real-time interface to the licensing systems, and given that they're different systems, and I mean, we don't have that. I don't know. I think that would be difficult to maintain that unless those were all centralized into one database to be able to do that.
Real-time systems do tend to be difficult to maintain, more difficult to maintain, and dare I say it, expensive.
Well, I guess the only question that there might be would be those license lookups, whether there could be one mechanism would be a web service off of those, both the BCD and the CCB lookup, so that you'd be making a call off of that spot rather than a license, trying to maintain a real-time interface in another direction.
Agree.
Yeah, so that might be an option to look at it, but again, those also take work and maintenance on folks, on the part of probably the local jurisdiction in maintaining a web service that would make that call. So, any other things that folks have problems or issues or questions about just the kind of the day-to-day licensing loads in your electronic databases, or validating those licenses, or anything particular about the access to that information?
Hi, this is Mighty Doe from CD Portland as well. Hi.
Hi.
We have the CCB license, but then sometimes the website say active, but then we cannot connect it because I think the developer and outer site, they're checking directly from the active CCB license or DCB license with your website. However, sometimes the account they have active, but then we go deep dive into that. It says suspend for CCB license. The suspend is like in the CCB, and then we go to the detailed information, which is suspend because they don't have the insurance, what kind of, I don't know. And then that's why we have to struggle with the outer user. They say, hey, this is a website active, but we cannot add this license account into our permit, because then we go there and say, oh, it's because you have to go there and take a look for suspend on the detailed information.
So let me make sure I understood what you're saying there, is that sometimes you have a customer and their license is inactive, And in order to figure out what's going on, you go to the CCB or the BCD website and kind of have to dig into that. Is that what you're saying?
Well, the website is active, but we're not able to make that the license active and out of office out of system, because one little part of the CCB license they put suspended. They don't put the active, but the suspended.
Oh, so this, maybe this is more like what you're talking about. So I know this happens to us sometimes. The license is active, but a piece of data like the insurance was expired and it didn't get updated on the licensing load. So in our system, it shows as inactive, but then we go and check it and it shows as active at CCB. So Noel, that's actually a good question. Yeah, that's a common thing that happens to us as well. It seems like maybe the insurance information maybe doesn't get updated on the CCB licenses as often. Is that true, or how does that work with the active status of a CCB license? Because that is a common occurrence.
It's certainly not true that it doesn't get updated as often. The poll's done in aggregate. How licensing happened, how licensing information moving from one status to another, and how bonding information, that's another one of a similar nature, not quite the same. I hesitate to comment on that is a human interface, shall we say, and not an automated update. So do you have a sense of what the step is that happens on your system that, again, if we check on the CCB website, it will show as active, but in our load, it's inactivated because that insurance hasn't been updated. And so, and it seems like that, so it's like the information somehow is being updated on your site, but it's not making it to the load? Or are you saying that the insurance information is almost kept separately than the other license status? no.
Okay.
That. And certainly the posit that the data is the insurance information is being updated, but it's not making it to the load file is not, as far as I know, possible. But lags are certainly possible.
Yes. Well, it seems to be that the insurance information is one of those places where that, and again, it will show, we will get the data that it shows, the license shows as active, just like it shows on your website, but that insurance information isn't updated. And I think that's what Portland is also describing. And I don't know how, anyways, maybe that's something to take back to CCB. I mean, if for I've actually thought about, and I don't know whether this is something that Portland, I'm not sure why we need your insurance data in our licensing system. It seems to me that if the license is active, that's all that matters. And I've been thinking that we should probably just disable that field and not validate against it, because that's really CCB business, and if the license is active, it's active. And I don't know, Portland, is that something that would work for you as a way to deal with that circumstance?
Sorry, I tried to unmute. Yeah, we have to take a look for that, because I don't know how, that's why we don't have developer here. We cannot tell what we take a look, but it would be nice if they say they're active. So that meaning we have to make active instead of the behind the scene with the little insurance thing with the suspend or something. That's caused us, the customer and us, to be saying, okay, sorry, I cannot do that, because that is, we cannot add your license into our system. But we will take another talk with developer, how to take a look, or maybe on your side that help us to be remove the status from us, so we don't have to be dealing with the issue, the problem moving forward.
Okay. And Noel, is that definitely something we can take as a given that that as long as the status is showing as active, that's fine, that we really don't need to be tracking that insurance expiration date in our systems and using it as part of our validation?
Absolutely, positively, yeah.
Okay.
That's digging a little too deep, shall we say. Just rely on the active status and go from there.
Okay, that's excellent information. Great. And are there similar issues with the building codes divisions licenses? Is there anything that happens through that database that causes a similar issue where it's showing active, but there's a piece of information that is stopping it from being active in Portland system? I'm not aware of that in our load, but maybe you are having an issue with something.
That's questions to me, Selena, not that I'm aware of.
No, yeah, that's more for Portland, whether there's something that they have where again, they see an active license in BCD, but it's not active in their system for some reason.
This is
I
Lee.
think
Oh, go ahead, Mikey.
no, go ahead, Lee.
Does have electronic permitting area. What I've seen in serving customers is that we download the license information to a lookup table, like a separate table from our permitting system, and suspended licenses don't update our permitting system. And so what I've experienced is that lag between when it gets fixed and when it shows up in our system. And so the customer will apply for permit and it says, no, your license isn't active. And we give them a link to go and look at their license. And so they do, and they would then see that, oh, it's suspended. And it's usually suspended because of, like, they didn't update their insurance or something like that. And so they will call the appropriate group and update whatever needs updating so that it becomes active. So again, that happens maybe at like 9 o'clock in the morning. And because our permitting system doesn't update suspended licenses, it only updates active, inactive, or inactive renewable, then in our permitting system, we can't see that it's suspended. And because it's been updated on the state site, it looks like it's active. And then the customer calls us and says, well, it's active, and so you should let me have a permit. But our system is looking at this separate table that has all the licenses in it. And so we have a project to work to sort that out. But there is that's kind of like the state sites don't say, yeah, this was suspended up until 10 o'clock this morning. And so it makes it really hard for us to say, well, it looks like it's active on the state and it looks like it's active here, but I don't know why, there's that gap.
Yeah, we have that there's definitely that lag because of how the systems work, right? We don't have real-time information. We get a load, that runs in the middle of the night. And so anything that happens same day where somebody resolves an issue with either of the licensing agencies, there's no way to have that instantly within our systems without having a live interface. And that would be, a very nice thing to have, but also a very difficult and very expensive thing to maintain generally, unless, again, there was some kind of web service that ran against, like, especially once things were up against, if everything was centralized at oregon.data.gov, potentially there could be something, a web service that would go out and grab that. But although, again, the data being centralized there, that doesn't make it real time either. So, I don't know a way around fixing the same day issues except what you're doing. I think we in e-permitting end up doing the same thing. You get the customer call, you do the research, you update it in your system manually, because it's not going to get updated in the load until the next day, and sometimes occasionally 2 days. So, but it sounds like you have something different with suspended licenses, that yours don't automatically get updated. That sounds like something that you may have to fix on your end of things in terms of how your load is looking, how your system is looking at the information provided.
Definitely. And it hasn't, and we do a manual workaround to get the customer their permit, because once they say, hey, your site is not letting me do my job, and we look it up and we look at the state site and we say, oh, well, it's showing active there. And so that's when I have our vertical application folks go in and like manually update, and then the customer can get their permit. It's just it's challenging, and so probably like you guys, we're getting our electronic ducks much more in a row than they have been before, when we were less reliant on electronic applications.
Yeah, and again, that's, so that involves either loading the data on more frequent, intervals than once a day, or having some kind of call against the data sets that is a real-time call to be able to, address that lag time. So we can put that in the kind of write that up as one of the, wish list things of the group to be able to have, and to think about different, see if there are different ways in which that could be created. That certainly, I think it would be challenging to maintain a real-time list for us to do that for everybody in the state, right? I think the idea would be to have the data in a spot where individual agencies could potentially, build a web service or use API to make a real-time validation call, and that would be an option, and that, we would take away the impediments of, at least trying to keep all of the data centralized and up to date as soon as possible. So. All righty, let's see. I'm not seeing Jonathan's email. On the screen. Okay. All right, so I think this is, we've kind of discussed pretty well number one. Yeah, so we're talking about the lag time of each of the agencies for updating data into the public view of portals, different ways that we could potentially have access. And again, that seems like that requires, the first step would be potentially at least having all of the different data that people pull in one location, like oregon.data.gov. One thing would be to talk about the frequency of how often that updated. What I'm hearing is that potentially it would be nice if that data was updated maybe more than once a day, and therefore an agency could have the choice of running that data set multiple times to keep it up, to have access to better information, or in a centralized location, which would allow folks to build jobs, to validate. But again, the more up to date that data is, the better for folks. Let's see, we also have his next set of things is about video inspections and remote inspections. And his suggestion here is that that if we're doing video inspections, that we could have the contractors or the installers actually provide pictures of their licenses within the video to meet the intent of existing rules. So I think maybe this is especially for things like the signing supervisor. Anybody have any thoughts about this question of video inspections? I mean, it seems to me most often that those licenses are actually caught at the beginning of in the permitting process, and not as much on the inspection ends of things, except potentially with the signing supervisor. Anybody have any other thoughts about that? Or
Hi, this is Lisa Gill with the City of Portland. You probably can't see my hand raised because the screen there. So for the City of Portland, I know that this question has been ongoing, and I believe our chief electrical inspector has been working with, and forgive me, I can't remember the acronym, but I know that they're working on a kind of a standardization for this in the electrical community. And I know that licensing is a big issue. It is at permit kind of application. And then again, the electrical code allows the inspector to check for the license as well during the inspection. I know that on certain types of inspections, we will accept underground or accept video or pictures. But I think one of the things, if I remember from our earlier conversations, is that we wanted to come up with at least some standardizations of what types of things that every jurisdiction would kind of agree on in concept, I think, so that if we're in Portland or Clackamas or Albany or whatever, contractors would be giving us the same information, which
So so in terms of the standardization of the electrical licensing things, so I mean, Jonathan's idea here is that one way, if you're doing video, or I think especially if you were just doing photo submittals, right? Like if you're doing a re-inspect or we've decided, and again, yes, that is a future discussion, right? Like video and photo inspections and what should be allowed under that, or what's the process for that, all of those pieces of things. But the idea of requiring the person submitting to provide, a photo of licensing information, that's not a bad, that certainly is a way of kind of doing a verification. They're putting it in the record and saying this license is doing this work, right? Or is the responsible party, and we're submitting that to you, right?
correct.
So.
And I think one of the other things that we were trying to figure out was, obviously we'd take people at our word. So say if I was the installer or the electrician, I'd hold up my license card or whatever at the beginning of the inspection. And we're just going to assume that, my name is Joe Smith, even though people may know me as Lisa Gill or something. We're going to take people at their word. The other piece of that is, and I think this was the bigger discussion for down the road, was if we do accept video or photos, what's our archival requirement for that? And do we have the capability, or do other jurisdictions have the capability to store this information? And I think the answer was kind of no. So that was the other question.
Yeah, and let's say that one is more for, that's the discussion when we do have a discussion about the video inspection and photos and what is I don't think there's any difference between that and a regular inspection documents, right? In terms of the retention schedules of it. But are you saying that retention, that holding onto the videos and the photos for that length of time is cumbersome because of the size of the files?
That would be an issue, yes.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, that's certainly, and again, that's not the discussion for today, but that's definitely something to think about in the future. I think kind of some of what you just said about taking folks at the word. One of the other things that Jonathan, I think, had flagged was that it would be nice to have, and this was an ask from BCD, and I think that's kind of what you're referring to, is a clarification about the scope of what each license can do. I know there are many different types of electrical licenses and a few different types of plumbing licenses, and even CCB licenses that have different scope of work, and whether there could be kind of it sounded like the ask was for kind of a synopsis or a one place where you could go and kind of look at each of the kind of a summary of what each license can do. Is that accurate? I think that's what Jonathan was kind of saying. Is that kind of reflect what other folks, or anybody want to add on to that?
I can add on to that, but Matt, do you want to go ahead first, since I've already talked, or Brian?
Well, Brian had his hand up first, so.
Well, Matt, why don't you go ahead on this, and then I'll just come in just a little bit, something else I want to mention. All right.
Okay. I was just going to say, sorry, I'm late. First of all, I had to deal with some stuff. But I think that synopsis, Andy just did one for the plumbing, and it was very useful for everybody to know like where those lines are drawn. And I think that an overall licensing type, what you can do with each one would be, a huge, benefit for all the jurisdictions to know exactly what those are. We came up with one the other day that I had never heard of for a plumbing license. It was like a PP, and it was a plumbing and pump installer. So there's things that are just random that, people don't know about, and having that list would be very helpful.
Yeah, I think I saw that on his email, and I think that's a great suggestion. I think we should work with CCB also and the other places, and then, post that centrally in an easily accessible place. So, Brian?
Yes, thank you, everybody. Brian Krieg, I work on behalf of IBEW, also the Plumbers Union UA 290, as Matt knows. The issue is of interest to the electricians in particular, and I think also the plumbers, about some possibilities with this. We recognize, yes, there's, maybe some challenges, the retention issue of, the data on that about using photos. But one of our ongoing battles it goes back for decades, is we're doing the work, or someone is doing the work, whether it's residential or even commercial, and the inspectors really aren't on site during the day. A lot of times when this is going, a lot of the work is going on. Quite often it's, the inspectors are going to be showing up after it's done to see, a certain amount, and the people aren't, our workforce isn't there. So there's no real way of validating whether it actually was a licensed electrician who did the work. I know that one of the things that popped up during the COVID bid over on somewhere in the Central Coast area is a contractor there did some very bad electrical connections work, sent the photographs into, I can't remember, it was the city or the county over there, dealing with it. And then upon further investigation on it, they found that he said it was a particular electrical contractor, and that electrical contractor wasn't hired to do that job. So it had been self-performed, and it was caught by the electrical inspector because the work was very poor. It's not uncommon that we have stuff that happens. So the photograph thing is intriguing to us about cracking down on some of the handyman type of work that goes on out there in the homes and in businesses out there. I've found interesting things in houses that I have bought when you start digging into why you get a problem going on at the house, and that it was done illegally on that. So we would like to be involved, is what I'm saying on that. If we explore this some more, it's of interest, but we do know that there's some challenges.
So Brian, just to make sure that we capture that correctly. So you're especially addressing the video and photo verification types of inspections, yeah, and the ability and potentially to expand that somewhat to also help with understanding who's actually doing the work.
Mm-hmm. And our guys have talked about this kind of back and forth a little bit behind the scenes, and I really need to get some of the our labor union folks there, and then probably a contractor or two too.
Okay, yeah, and again, I think we'll expand upon that discussion when we talk more about video and photo inspections and kind of where there's a lot of different pieces that go with that. Certainly where I think many jurisdictions are starting to really use that technology, and so I think there are going to be ongoing discussions about what works, what doesn't work, how to improve or what not to do as we proceed with that. So
great.
Yeah, excellent. All right, so that I think there's agreement that's definitely, there's some interesting things to talk about in the process of video and photo inspections, and kind of the ways in which that could be used to help kind of understand, and verify who has done the work. So think about folding a licensing component or a licensing verification process into the process of video and photo inspections. then also the question of, and I see your hand up, Lisa, then the other piece is also having BCD, CCB, and maybe some of the other places work on a synopsis of the different license categories and what they can do. And I think that's a great idea. Lisa, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just wanting to bring up here the other question of kind of addressing what Brian just said, where what we have found is that people are kind of able to kind of game the system by submitting an electrical application. I'm just going to use that for an example, and to get their permit. And then we will have somebody, a contractor will say, hey, I wasn't the one who was on this job, but we have a signed application with their number from somebody. We're not saying that anybody forged it, but that's how we got it. So the question I have is, does anybody or does BCD do any kind of a email system back saying, hey, you've got this permit in your name once somebody applies for it? Just kind of a notification.
Well, on e-permitting, we don't do not every single time a permit is pulled, but we do in our system when if somebody registers for our website and they associate a contractor's license to their account, that contractor gets an email saying somebody just associated your license to their account. So we have certainly gotten calls of people saying, hey, somebody just did that, and we always then go follow up and see what the deal is. Sometimes it's sometimes it's truly they forgot that they had been a subcontractor and it was okay. And then sometimes it legitimately is an incorrect association, and we remove that from the account. So we do that as part of our electronic system. Yes, there is that notification again, but not every single time a permit is pulled does that happen. So I think that would be, because the only way you do that would be you'd have to send an email to the, well, actually, they might, now that I'm thinking about it, because we do send some, I mean, that is something we could explore expanding. I'm not sure that I have to, I don't want to say it's doing one thing and it's not. So I'd have to think about whether, but I don't think they get it every time a permit. I know that they get it when it's associated to an account. So, Matt, do you do something similar in Clackamas?
Well, we just experienced the same issues. I was dealing with it earlier this week where an electrical contractor, somebody applied in their name. We sent an email correction and they said, what is this? We're not doing this job, and called and asked to be removed from that permit. So, it's a tough thing to, I think most people are honest, but you have that percentage where they're going to just grab a license number and pull that permit under that if they can.
I guess one thing that we may want to we don't have anybody from our enforcement section here, but I'm wondering whether those things should be forwarded to our enforcement section, at least for a warning type of letter, or also just so that somebody could be, if it's happening in multiple jurisdictions, you might have one and maybe the city of Portland has one and somebody else has one from the same person doing the same thing. Then it becomes an enforcement case after a warning letter the first time, if it truly is fraud versus an honest mistake, which potentially could happen. So
yeah, and that's what we recommended to them, to get a hold of CCB as well as BCD and report that, because whether it was an accident or not, it should be noted and dealt with.
Yeah, and actually, as I'm thinking about it, I think we remove those folks from the licenses from those folks' accounts, but I don't know that we always had to move it to enforcement. That may be something, again, as a discussion of something that we all try to do when that happens, just to keep track of folks doing for things, and maybe we can work with CCB on that as well. Lee, go ahead.
Yeah. I haven't noticed, but does CCB or BCD folks, do you guys collect email addresses from customers when they update their information?
That's a question for Graham and Noel.
Interesting question. Complicated because of the phrase you used. Do we collect them from customers when they update information? We do collect shall we say, license-specific email address. It's not, if I recall correctly, required on the initial licensure document. We additionally collect an email address which we use as the unique ID when people access our online systems to manage those licenses. Those may or may not be the same email address. So I really don't want to answer yes, and I can't answer no. How's that?
Excellent. What I was getting at was that if a contractor updates their information, like, name, phone, address, whatever is required for having on file, that could come across in the download or be uploaded to the main OregonData.gov, and it would be possible for our system anyway to automatically email that customer and say, instead of just what they log in with to our permitting, like our online permitting system, we could also email directly to the email they have on file with their license. And that would allow customers to know when their license was being used to pull permits in Portland. But that only works if the customer is updating that information with the state so that that's always on file.
Right. Yeah, I see now where you're wanting to go with that. And that's a real interesting avenue of inquiry. We don't release email addresses. My understanding, again, I'm the IT manager, I'm a technologist. I'm not a policy geek. I can't say why or wherefore. We don't release email addresses. The name, address, phone number, that kind of stuff does go out in our downloads. So how you make use of that becomes a little difficult. We'd have to get notification from your systems, for example, that a contractor was working. It may not be quite the issue for us because we don't deal with permit pulls directly. We deal with contractor licensure.
No, I think maybe one of the questions would be whether, as you're moving forward and adopting a new licensing system, whether the official license, the email associated with the license might become a required field and become that part of that load. Because I think, Graham, so does BCD collect? I think BCD does collect email, but are those required fields?
There's a spot on the application, the initial application, for an email address. It's not required. However, I'll probably say 90% of the applicants put their email address on there.
Mm-hmm.
We have over 46,000 licenses, in our database. So really the only time that we would catch that is like during renewals, or if we get returned mail, if somebody moved and didn't update their address, and we'd have to contact them for a new address. If we noticed they didn't have an email address in there, then we would ask them at that time, for their email address. And we were talking with Ron Knox yesterday about, electronic renewals being sent out. And one of the discussions was having them, every time they renew, provide an updated email address. So we did have that in our system. So that's something that we're exploring right now, but we do ask for it, but it's not required. But if we do go into MLO and we see that there is no email address in there, then we'll contact the individual and try to get an email address. So we can put it in our system.
I think that would be good, certainly having that a required field potentially. Also, it might take also clarification that that's the centralized, what you're looking for is the main contact that goes with that license, which can be complicated if it's a big entity, right? Lisa, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm on my iPad. So I have a question for the group. And, this is kind of a question that Portland's kind of trying to figure out, but do other jurisdictions limit what an applicant can apply for online? So if I'm, say, an electrical contractor and I enter my CCB into a website and maybe my signing supervisor license, or if I don't have one because I don't need one, do you just let them get whatever they need, or is there some sort of a stop on that, based on their license type? How do other jurisdictions do that?
Well, I can speak for e-permitting and then maybe Matt will jump in. We do have verification. So you can only apply you need to have the contractor license. So if I'm going to pull an electrical permit, I need to have an electrical contractor's license associated with my account. Plumbing permit, only a plumbing business license. CCB license is going to allow you to pull structural and mechanical, right? So we have that. The one caveat to that is that if you're applying for an electrical permit, we're not verifying. You can have any of the electrical contractor licenses, but if you're pulling something beyond the scope of what your license allows, then that's on you, because you filled out that application. You should know what the scope of your contracting license allows you to do or not do. And again, you're leaving a compliance record. If you only have a limited energy and you're putting in for an electrical service, you filled out that whole application, you provided your contractor information. It's pretty clear that you bear the responsibility for that. So that's how we do it. I don't know, Matt, I don't know if you want to address also.
Yeah, our process right now is a little bit antiquated. We've had some that, like, let's just say a plumbing contractor has applied for an electrical permit, and through our ACA, through Acela, you have to be a licensed contractor in order to pull permits through that. So, but we have had some of them where they get through, where a plumbing contractor pulls an electrical permit or vice versa. We do go through daily for all our ACA permits and do kind of a quick audit and make sure that, there's not, a code enforcement issue or something like that. And we try and catch those just with a manual process. But we're trying to, we're looking at, we just implemented project docs going to self-service applications where anybody could apply on that, and we would have those licensing restrictions on there unless they're a homeowner. So we're trying to find the best solution for that.
Do you have a disclaimer on your website, either of you?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. They have to abide by
believe-
the, yeah, absolutely.
I believe.
They have to agree to the terms and conditions. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Lee?
Who checks at what point do you check to see that the work was completed by someone with the appropriate licenses?
So we just do it through our inspections. And, we have had some, as I was explaining earlier, that the permits are applied for. There's no contractor on site. We go out, we do the inspection, we approve it, and later we find out that person on the permit didn't actually do the work. We've ran into that a couple of times, but typically we see somebody on the job, and if we see it's another contractor, our inspectors will catch it at that point.
And again, for permitting, we're not actually doing that verification because that's each individual jurisdiction, mostly through the inspection process. So, but I think that loops us back to that previous discussion about photos and videos and the potential of maybe using some of that technology to help, again, to create an additional level of verification of who's doing work. So, but did you have an additional question or comment, Lee, about that?
Well, right now we have what we've been doing is looking at like on our site right now, you can get a mechanical permit if you have a CCB license, and that's it. Off you go. With plumbing, we identify between journeyman can't take out plumbing permits. It has to be a PD. So we look for that specifically. Our electrical currently has kind of a complicated matrix of, well, if you have the limited energy, then you only see certain things that you can buy. Like you can't rewire the whole house. You don't get that, the options there to pick. And then and then different so then what we ran into, because it's kind of complicated, is, well, who is able to do what things and what supervisor licenses for sure are needed. And then we ran into problems with the QP. And so we were considering, and Lisa and I, we've kind of been talking about this, is like, do we make it much less complicated, just let people buy what they want to buy? But then how do we check like the other end? It's like, who checks when to see, like, are the appropriate people doing the work? I mean, we don't want limited energy folks to be rewiring people's houses, but we wanted to just kind of see how other jurisdictions were, making sure everything was safe and cooled, and at what point do we check? So I think it's really interesting that we're having this conversation, because like, it's easy to electronically check at the beginning, but not if licenses can be lots of different things. Like that QP license is very, from a computer programming perspective, that is a very difficult license to check.
Yeah, I think that brings us back to that idea of the summary, and that I think would also help to create different options or more options to be able to, it could be that you open up the electronic process. So if you have any type of electrical we've got any type of electrical contractor license can pull an electrical permit, but even a permit tech or anybody looking at the license application, if they have a summary that says, here's what can be done under the scope of that limited energy, and you see that they're rewiring the house, it's like, there's the red flag right there, right? So that would help catch that stuff before it gets to the inspection phase. But the inspectors also have a piece of looking at that as well. And certainly I know one of the nice things about all the mobile inspection technology is that that's right in their hands, as to they've got out all the information about the applicant and what license is on that permit. And so they should also be able to see if somebody's, listed in something that's inappropriate for the scope of the work that they're doing. So
a lot of our permits, though, are issued electronically and immediately. And so no one is looking at those at all until the inspections portion. And so like a tech will never see pretty much any of them. Like, there's very few, only the ones that require plan review that are getting reviewed by a tech before they're issued and also reviewed. I mean, and thousands of permits. So we would not be able to look at them.
Well, again, I think that's where inspectors that's part of, for many jurisdictions, that's part of the check of what they're doing when they're inspecting. And if they've got that information in a mobile app or in something, that certainly helps them to see those things that are out of the scope of what a license would do. Matt, is that something that you all see often or find often, that your inspectors find out of whack?
Yeah, they do. I mean, I don't know that it's all the time, but they do check for that. And if they identify it, then they will make the call and say, hey, you need to update your permits with, a lot of times subdivisions or something like that. They'll apply and then maybe switch contractors midstream. So if that happens, they'll identify that, tell them to resubmit with the appropriate contractor.
Gotcha.
One of the common ones that we see.
Okay. And for Portland, is that part of your inspection process generally, or is that?
Well, it is part of the inspections process, but what is happening is that because we based our kind of our online permitting with your license type. So what happens is people just get a permit with something on it, then they call for inspection, and we're like, hey, this is a service reconnect only, and they go, that's the only thing I could get. Well, then it's like, we have to go back to the beginning and kind of figure out, well, why weren't you able to get what you're able to get? So yes, we are checking that once the inspector is out in the field. But what we're trying to do is, how are other jurisdictions, I know Portland is different, but how are other jurisdictions able to get their customers through that online permitting process? Because everybody I hear it, says Portland's so complicated, you know, and we're just trying to figure out what generally other people do. It sounds like, I think Matt was saying you have people kind of spot check the permits that have been obtained overnight. We in Portland, ours just are out the door from the moment you hit enter, and then you can pay, and great, I've got a permit. It may not be the right one, but I got it. And it sounds like with e-permitting, people are able to get a permit, and you're saying, hey, you sign this disclaimer or whatever, you know.
Well, you have to have a license
Right.
within the trade, right? So you can't,
Right.
a plumber
Right.
cannot take an electrical, et
Correct.
cetera. But yes, for the scope, it's, you know, you verified it. And so that's where the inspectors, if somebody's, you know, yes, because they're auto issue just like yours.
Okay.
You can either have your permit text if you're a smaller volume jurisdiction. Many of our jurisdictions look at the trade permits that have come in during the night and that are auto issued and kind of do a spot check on them that way in the office. And then some of them catch them on the inspection side of things.
So Selena, do you think there's anybody, I mean, can like Lee and Kelly and my team from my team over here, can we reach out to you separately and kind of have an offline discussion and get some kind of feedback from you?
Sure.
Perfect. I appreciate
Absolutely.
it.
Yep.
Thank
Happy
you.
to. So. All right. Any other things that folks have about thinking about this issue of kind of scope of license verification, the potential of using other technology potentially, or how we use technology to do that? Or should we move on to the next thing on Brian's list or our list? And Laura, would you mind sharing that email again? Okay. Okay, so his, and can you also move down a little bit further than that too? Okay, so I think, so this is kind of going along with that discussion that we've been having about who can purchase permits, and he's actually suggesting that the division should explore expanding who can purchase permits and allowing folks besides electrical contractors to purchase permits. And it's unfortunate he's not here because I'm not sure how what he has in mind with who you would be allowing to buy them besides electrical contractors. Anybody have any kind of thoughts about that? What he does I'll have a follow-up here is also he's talking about how, so in the rules, it specifically says that a signing supervisor is supposed to sign each permit digitally. It is difficult to be able to have an actual signature on a permit when all of these applications are coming in online. I know that we don't have an actual physical signature requirement in e-permitting. It is required that you designate who the signing supervisor is, you know, as a contractor, you know, especially even if you have multiple signing supervisors, you should be saying who is doing, you know, who is the signing supervisor on this particular job. Matt, Lisa, is this how are you all dealing with this? Is this a difficulty in your permitting process?
Well, going back,
go ahead,
Lisa. I was just going to say, going back to the original question on what he might be asking, and I'm just reading into this, but as I was saying earlier, you know, you have a subdivision, you have a, you know, production builder that comes in that is pulling, you know, maybe 15, 20 lots, and they haven't gotten their bids back for electrical contractors, but they want to get the process going. I'm wondering if he means something like that, where they can purchase those permits and then notify us who the contractor is at a later date, instead of making the electrical contractor do those.
And logistically, and I saw you nodding your head about that, Lisa. I mean, then logistically, how do you track that? I mean, what would be the mechanism of making sure that you get that information at a later date? I could see that as a concern.
Right.
So
It-
we do it on occasion, and we'll do a notice in the permit that says, verify electrical permits, prior to, start construction. So we won't release the building permit until we have that electrical permit and the application given to us. So.
Gotcha.
So in Portland, we were doing the same thing, but what had happened was people would get that permit, and then they would call for an inspection, and then our inspector, it would be time for inspection, and we would not have an electrical contractor listed. And so then we would say, hey, we're not going to come out to the site because we don't have one here. And then they would fax it in at a later date. And then our office support staff would have to match up electrical or plumbing applications with the structural permit. And sorry, I was getting a Teams call right in the middle of that. And so then what we're trying to do is have that information up front. So that's where we have a lot of people who are submitting an electrical or plumbing permit application with, say, I'm just going to say Lisa's electrical contracting shop. And then we can't, and then later at a later date, they then say, oh, it's really, Matt's electrical or something like that. So I think that's probably what he's alluding to. In larger jurisdictions, it's kind of a problem because you can fall through the cracks, but we're trying to figure out a way that people could do that. And then the other issue is, I think I agree with you on the whole signing supervisor. We just have to have them designate who that is, on the electrical application. And then we also say a lot of those come in with a signature on it. So we're just, hey, that's who provided us that information, and that's what we're going with. So I'm not quite sure. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a play. The signing supervisor piece is probably something that needs to be looked at in the rules, because the rules say one thing, but I think in practice, I think in practice, what's happening is that electronically we're requiring the contractors to designate who is that signing supervisor, but it's not a signature, except in some circumstances where you get something. And I think that meets the intent, right? The idea is that you as an electrical contractor are indicating who, and the jurisdiction has notice of who is that responsible signing supervisor for a particular job. But I think that's probably something that needs to be addressed in the rules, so that that's clarified, that you can either have the wet signature or you can have it designated, and that there's that there's the responsibility that goes along with that, to do that. And then he's also said the question about posting the permit, and in the digital age, is this a practical requirement? And I think that's something that I know I struggle with. In a way, it feels like, it's out there in the world. You should be able to, you can search for, if any place that has an electronic website, you can search and find out whether a permit was pulled there. Do you really need to have somebody posting that? And we certainly have some jurisdictions who are, feel very strongly that people should still be, printing it and posting it. And what are your thoughts on that?
I can let somebody go first.
Clackamas County, I don't think we're requiring them to post it. I think as long as they have an address posted and they can find the address, they can look up and make sure that the permit has been applied for. And that's typically how our inspectors are looking at it. I think we do upload a card that they can put in their window, but I don't think anyone's really enforcing it. I think it's a great thing for neighbors, so they can see it and go, oh, they've gotten a permit for that and they're aware of it. So.
And in Portland, we have people who are requiring that, and then we have people who are not requiring that. And so what I mean by that is on our residential side of the house, they're saying, yes, people have to have their paper plans on site. And some other people are saying, that's not at all possible, because we issued them digitally, and that would be inequitable if you would make some people then print them out. The other question is that people don't have devices to be able to look at them on, meaning the customer on the residential side of things. We certainly have access to some plans on our iPads out in the field, subject to when that permit was issued and if those have been updated or uploaded to our trim files, which is more of one of the folks on our technology team could explain that a little bit better than I can, but there is a way that inspectors can get to those out in the field, but that's subject to bandwidth and how large the file is. So, you know, we're kind of looking for House Bill 2415 to kind of give us some guidance here in Portland. But I think we're going toward being able to say to customers, you know, if you have paper, because that's how you submitted, great, but you're not going to have them as long as you can bring them up on a device that's larger than a cell phone.
So that's some of the plans, but that also addresses also the issue of like posting the permit. And I think that's a similar that probably in the digital age, it makes sense to have more flexibility than the idea of it's got to be on paper, but maybe it needs, from what I hear you saying, Lisa, is that it could be an either or, like you give the customer a choice. We do still need to be able to see plans on site. We do need to be able to know that a permit is pulled. So maybe there's the choice of paper or being able to have a digital display, or kind of building some of that flexibility into the rules. I think that makes sense.
I think either way, what we don't want to do is have Inspector A saying, I refuse to do the inspection because you don't have the paper. And then Inspector B is like, oh, hey, I can look at it on your iPad or whatever, your laptop. That's great. We don't really have that trouble on the commercial side of the house because a lot of our larger jobs in Portland have a job shack or somebody's there, you know, with the plans to be able to show the inspectors. So a little bit of a different side of the house in Portland.
And that's a good distinction potentially, is that difference. And there are different expectations between commercial and residential in terms of who's likely to be doing the work, and both of those things
Correct.
are almost always going to have contractors on the commercial side, whereas residences are a whole different thing. Matt, did you have something you wanted to add?
I was just going to throw it out there that we do require printed plans on all the job sites, just because we've ran into many circumstances where people, you know, the subcontractor is using unapproved plans that don't match with the approved plans. So it ensures that they have the approved set out there that they're working off of. Whether they choose to or not, it's a different story.
Matt, what did you think about Lisa's idea of the you know, potentially moving in the direction where you could have the choice of the printed plans, approved plans, or access to be able to display those approved plans on a big enough, you know, screen to be able to look at them?
You know, I think that's a good option, and most of our inspectors carry iPads that they can look at it digitally as well. But we also, you know, just being the jurisdiction we're in, we go all the way up to Mount Hood. We do have accessibility issues, you know, with internet and everything, which complicates things. So that's another reason that we've required the plans on site.
Well, if I understood Lisa, that would be that the customer would have to be able to provide electronic access to it, right? So it's great if the inspectors have it, but the idea would be the customer either needs to be able to have a printout of the approved things or be able to display on their home computer or whatever, if the inspector needs to be able to see it.
I think it's a good idea. I agree with that. I think there will be complications with it.
Right. And
Right.
we were thinking about that because the inspection supervisors got together and we were talking about that. Some of the things that we came up with kind of right away is, yes, the customers at the time of the inspection, if they did not have paper plans, they would have the digital approved stamped copy readily accessible and available in a location that was not, I don't remember how we put it, but basically we don't want an inspector to have to go through somebody's house and go, oh, I have a computer here in my bedroom. You can come look at it here. And we don't want to set people up for that. So that's what we were saying. I do have some language that we wrote down that basically said, kind of gave some parameters that kind of protected both the customer and the inspector. So just trying to meet people where they're at in this digital age.
If you could forward that, we can publish
Sure.
that out with what we've got here. And then I think that sounds like that's part of a future, potentially part of the larger rulemaking as we're moving towards 2025 of what does an electronic system, contain and how do you deal with those pieces. But I think that would be very helpful.
Sure. Who do you want me to send them to?
You could send them either to, do you have them right there? Do you want to send them in the chat here, a link?
Oh,
Or you could send
I can't because you're on my iPad. The meeting's on
Sure.
my iPad.
Go ahead
So
and send them. Go ahead and send them to me because we were also you wanted to do an offline meeting
Yes.
about licensing, and we can set that up that way.
perfect.
Okay, let's see. So I think there's some. So there's definitely some merit to discussing whether there are some rule changes that should be made. We already made a couple of cleanups to the rules to right in our they're currently getting rid of requirements for fax machines, saying that you could send things by telegraph, that kind of stuff. But I think this is what Jonathan is pointing to is some further cleanup of recognition that many things are happening digitally and that, we may not need a signature per se. We need a way to have somebody take responsibility for that. And that may be electronic. And the same with the posting of the permit. And also, again, for future discussion, plans, because that's a little bit more complicated how we deal with the hard copy of plans versus electronic plans, to continue having discussions about that. And then I think this was we've already kind of discussed this, but he's also talking about licensing clarification. So again, that's more of a both CCB and BCD to work on some kind of documentation about the scope of work. And then the virtual inspection guides, I think that's probably a broader discussion group that needs to happen amongst multiple jurisdictions and the contractors who are doing about virtual inspections, right? And photo inspections and what types of, parameters, if there are any types of parameters we want to put around those. But I think probably that may take a little time as people need to probably use the technology a little bit and kind of get a sense of what issues develop in the process of that before anybody writes official rules. But definitely something for further discussion, and maybe some best practice guides too might be something to think about. So. Anybody have other things besides that relate to licensing requirements, licensing loads that they want to throw out for the group? No? Okay. Well, I think we get a little bit of extra gift of time then. Nobody's going to complain about that. I think it was a great discussion. Thank you very much for the participation. I think we have a lot of good things to bring back to the main rulemaking committee and some things for further discussion as well. Thank you. Have a good rest of the day. Stay cool, everybody.
Thank you.
All right. Take care. Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.
Thank you.